Hello, my name is Zach Gibbs, and I'm a content developer within education services inside Juniper Networks. And today we will be going through the verifying MacVerf L2 and L3 isolated tenants learning byte. All right, so here is our topology. In this topology, we have a few different devices. We have Spine 1 and Spine 2, and then we have Leaf 1 and Leaf 2. And then we have Host 1 and Host 3 that connect into Leaf 1. Now, Spine 1 and Spine 2 are obviously the spine devices in our data center, and Leaf 1 and Leaf 2 are the leaf devices. We already have EVPN VXLAN set up. We've already configured MacVerf with L2 and L3 isolated tenants. So all that is configured in a different learning byte. So if you're interested about that, please go check that out. But just as a refresher, we have Leaf 1 that has two MacVerfs. That's going to be V10 and V20. And then Leaf 1 also has two Type 5 VRFs that are just standard routing instances with the instance type of VRF. And that is the V10 T5 and the V20 T5. Now, V10 VRF or MacVerf is connected to the V10 T5 MacVerf, and V20 is connected to the V20 T5 VRF. And so then we have the IRB10 interface that is a part of the V10 T5 MacVerf and is the layer 3 interface for the V10 VLAN. And then we have the IRB20 interface that is within the V20 T5 VRF, and it is the layer 3 interface for the VLAN V20. And so nothing to point out is host 1 is using the 10.1.1.1 IP address, and it'll be within the VNI 5010. And host 3 is using the 10.2.3 IP address, and it is in the VNI of 5020. And so with those subnets, those VNIs, those VLANs, I forgot to mention the VLANs. Host 1 uses VLAN V10 and host 3 uses VLAN V20. They are isolated layer 2 and layer 3. Now, not covered in this learning byte, and I will cover this in a different learning byte, is connecting the T5 routing instance to another T5 routing instance, actually both of those T5 routing instances to other T5 routing instances in the data center, so we can see how those hosts can then communicate with each other and communicate with other hosts outside of the data center as well. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and jump to the CLI of Leaf 1. We'll be focusing primarily on Leaf 1 here in this learning byte, and we'll get this going. Okay, so here is Leaf 1, and as I mentioned before, MacVerf with L2 and L3 isolated tenants is already configured, so we're just simply verifying what we have here. And so here's Leaf 1. Let's do the run show BGP summary command to begin. And you can see here that we do have the route tables that are associated with these VRFs. But there's no routes there yet. And that's okay because we haven't connected it to another T5 VRF. So that's expected. Now, a thing I do want to point out is that these BGP sessions are to Spine 1 and Spine 2. And so Spine 1, Spine 2 are route reflectors. So any routes that are sent to them will be reflected. And so this doesn't really tell us all that much other than things are set up to pass routes. However, what we can do is we can do the run show route advertise protocol BGP, and then we use the Spine 1 session, the IP address associated with Spine 1, and we can see what routes we are sending to Spine 1. So these are the routes that we're sending to Spine 1 that then would be reflected to any other BGP speakers that would be interested in what we're sharing here. And so you can see a few different things here. Something I want to point out is we see here the route distinguisher, actually right here, the route distinguisher. This is the route distinguisher we configured for the, actually it's going to be all of this, not just that first part, for the, the V10 MacVerf. And so that's great. That's what we see here. We see the VNI, and then we see some MAC addresses, and we'll see that a couple more times here. Then we scroll down, we'll start seeing it for the route distinguisher that we have for the V20 MacVerf. And you can see the VNI associated with that, and also MAC addresses that we're sending along here as well. And Of course, this is the BGP EVPN.0 table, so it's going to have all the routes in that table that we're sending for that table, that we're advertising. And then we scroll down, then we see our Type 5 routes. Now, these Type 5 routes are important. If you recall from the configuration learning byte, we configured an export policy to export the routes that are associated with the IRB interfaces and the hosts. The subnet that's associated with the IRB interfaces, the hosts, and whatnot. You can see we're advertising these as Type 5 EVPN routes. And you can see the route distinguisher that you have here, the 192.168.100.11. Of course, that is the loopback, based off of the loopback address for leaf 1. And you can see the 105, if you recall from the configuration learning byte, that's what we used, was 105 for the V10 T5 instance, routing instance, and then 205, so the IP address, then 205 for the route distinguisher for the V20 T5 routing instance. And then you can see the IP address represented here that is being passed along. That is representative of the IRB.10 subnet, and this is representative of the IRB.20 subnet, or the host 1 subnet that host 1 is in and the subnet that host 3 is in. So things look pretty good there. And if we scroll down, we can see the individual route tables, what's being advertised through the individual route tables, and you can see those same routes. And so, of course, the BGP EVPN.0 is going to have all the routes, and then we can see it broken out into the different route tables here. And so you can see the T5, you can see the V10 EVPN table, and we could go through these individual tables, but no need to do so since we did talk about those routes with just the BGP EVPN.0 table. And so you can see there, the whole point here is you can see what routes you're actually advertising. It's important that you are advertising the correct routes. And then we could do the run show Mac VRF forwarding instance, or rather interface, XE003. And this is the interface that is pointed towards host 3. And you can see here, you see the instance name. That's important. We see it's V20. That's the Mac VRF instance. And we have the interface, the name of the VLAN ID. We see some forwarding state and untagged. So that means it's an access interface. And we can do the same thing with XE004. We can see the routing instance name, as well as those other parameters such as the VLAN name and the VLAN ID that we saw in the previous command. And then the next command I would like to look at is the run show Mac VRF. Let's see, forwarding Mac IP table. And then we can specify the instance. We're going to say V10. And we can see the IP addresses and MAC addresses that are associated with different entries and the interface it's going through. And so that looks good. And then you can also see the interface that it's found out of. Now, there's nothing really special about this output because we're not sharing routes across the data center. But we'll look at that in a different learning byte when we do more than what we're doing here. And then we could do the V20 and get similar information. You can see the IP address. This is for host 3. And if we scroll back up, this was the IP address of host 1, as well as the MAC address. And you can see the interface it's found out of. I should have said that before, but you can see that with host 3 as well. Here's the IP address, and then the MAC address, and then the interface it's found out of. And then let's look at the run show EVPN database command. Now you can specify a specific instance if necessary, but we only have 2 instances here. The V10 and V20 instances that are Mac VRF instances, so don't really need to filter it based on one or the other here. But if you have a lot of Mac VRFs, then it might be useful to filter it based on the instance. And you can see information. You can see the MAC address and the VNI, as well as the IP address associated with it for each of the Mac VRFs. And you see that for the V10 Mac VRF, as well as the V20 Mac VRF. And so then let's look at the run show EVPN instance extensive, specify the V10 instance. There's a lot of good information in here. And you can see things like, okay, what's the route distinguisher for that instance? You can see the instance name, see the encapsulation type, and then you can see the MAC database status and the different statistics that you see here. And then you can see the ESIs, as well as being single-homed or multi-homed, And then the IRB interface, we can see the one IRB interface here, IRB 10, and the VNI 5010 associated with it. We can see that it's up. And then I really like this, the L3 context. And so where is the L3 interface actually located? We know that we're using the IRB.10 interface as the L3 interface for the V10 VLAN, but where is the actual L3 interface located? What is the context? And we see that IRB10 interface is in that V10_T5 routing instance. So it's in the associated routing instance, and that's what we want to see here. And then we see the VLAN 10, specify, it shows a domain ID, IRB interface. And then we have the router ID, as well as the source VTEP IP address. So this is where the VXLAN tunnels are going to be sourced from. And then we could do the same thing with the V20 instance. And we're going to have pretty much the same information, just slightly different since it's a different instance. We have the instance name, then we have the route distinguisher, and as well as the IRB interface. We see it's VNI 20, status is up, and we can see the L3 context is in the V20T5 routing instance. So that does bring us to the end of this Learning Byte. In this Learning Byte, we demonstrated how to verify L2 and L3 isolated tenants with MacVerf in a data center. So as always, thanks for watching.
Visit the Juniper Education Services website to learn more about courses. View our full range of classroom, online, and e-learning courses. Learning paths, industry segment and technology-specific training paths. Juniper Networks certification program, the ultimate demonstration of your competence. And the training community, from forums to social media. Join the discussion.